So for the past 20 years, I've been living and working with refugees at Romero House, which is a small community in the west end of Toronto between the Junction, Hyde Park, and Parkdale. That's where we're located, and we have 4 small houses, 3-story old Ontario houses. In each house there are about 12 refugees and 2 people, myself and 7 interns who would be about your age, who do give a year or 2 of service to live and work with refugees. We also have a center on Bloor West, which is a community center and housing up above that. So at any one time, we have about 60 refugees that we're living and working with. So I could talk a long time about refugees, the work that we do, and so on. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer those. But tonight, what I want to share with you is what I've learned from my refugee neighbors over these 25 years. And I must say that recently, it has struck me even more deeply how I've been really changed by this experience. I now see the world really differently from the way I used to 25 years ago. And I now understand that the refugees have become the eyes of my eyes, that I see the world through their eyes. And this has been a tremendous blessing. So let me describe to you what happened one day, about 25 years ago. I had just started living at the little house on Keele Street. I was sitting on the back porch of this old house, looking out onto a backyard, an ordinary backyard. And there was a phone call from the border, and the person at the end of the line said, "There's a young girl from Eritrea. She's just arrived. She needs a place to stay." I said, "Well, we have a room. Send her right over." So about an hour later, the doorbell rang, and this really cool, kind of hip-looking young girl, about 15, came to the door, and she just had a little overnight bag. I welcomed her, we put the bag in the room, and I said, "Would you like a cup of tea?" She said, "Yeah." Cool. And we sat on the back porch together having tea, and she looked out onto the backyard that I thought I knew really well. And she looked out and she said to me, "Who live out there?" I said, "Nobody lives out there. We live here. Nobody lives out there." She said, "No. Who live out there?" I said, "No, nobody lives there. We live here. It's just a backyard." She said, "No. Person there. House there." And I looked out onto the backyard, and for the first time, I saw it. And the only thing she said to me, "Person there, house there, home there." And when I looked again through her eyes, I saw And the only thing I could say was, yes, there's a house. It's a house for a car. We call it a garage. And she said, a house for a car? I said, yes, a house for a car. And it was like, for the first time, I saw we actually build houses for cars. But I never saw it before. So, needless to say, for the next couple of days, I sat and looked at the house for the car. And we had a team meeting together. And I said to the interns, what are we going to do with the house for the car? Because at that particular time, as now, there was an acute homeless crisis in the city. And I said, this doesn't make sense to have a house for a car when we have no room for people. And so we talked and we said, we will turn the house for a car into a room for a person. But it's easier said than done. And if you know anything about building, to do anything like that, you have to go to City Hall and get a permit. So I went down to City Hall and went around and around and around. And to summarize the conversations that we had, that I had with the city officials about this old garage, and believe me, it was a falling apart garage. I went to the official and I said to him, we would like to turn the house for a car into a room for a person. And he said, you can't do that. I said, why not? He said, well then, everybody would do it. And I said, great. And this look of terror came over his face. And he said, but if everybody did it, there would be no room for the cars. And I realized that in his mind, it was a greater crisis that there would be homeless cars than there would be homeless people. So we had more meetings, we looked at the garage, and we decided we are going to turn the house for a car into a room for God. We're going to make it into a little meditation room, a place of quiet. Only this time, we would not go to City Hall. We would just do it because we were sure there was a law against having a room for God in your backyard. So this was, for me, it wasn't just about the garage, and it wasn't about the car. It was an insight into my whole culture that I thought I knew. I knew my backyard. There were flowers, there were plants, and a garage, but I never thought of it as a house for a car. And when this young girl looked at this house with such shock, it kind of woke me up, and I realized how profoundly materialistic we are, that we don't even notice it. We build houses for cars because cars are so important to us. If you buy one, you're somebody. If you drive it, you think you're going somewhere. Now, I'm not against cars. I have one. Just to confess that. But it's not the car itself, it's what we make of it. And what this incident revealed to me was how materialistic this culture really is. And as I listened to her and many of the other people, especially the Africans who came to the house, I learned other things. And they said things like, why are so many people so unhappy? They have so much. And I said, you mean they have a lot of things? They said, no. They have a place. They're citizens. They have a place on earth and nobody can make them move. Don't they realize how lucky they are? And they were puzzled why most people that they talked to seemed so unhappy and so ungrateful. I think you have only to talk to a refugee who has barely escaped to be very, very grateful just for being alive, just for having a place of safety, a place to live. So all of this awakened within me a kind of double awareness. The first was I saw my own culture, and I think it's hardest of all to see our own cultures. It's almost easier to see somebody else's culture. At least you know it's a culture. And even if you don't understand it, you know it's there. But to see your own culture is really hard. You think of it as normal. So I saw it really is materialistic. And the more that I thought about it, I began to see how absolutely soul destroying it is to live in a culture that builds houses for cars. And I don't think we know it. I think we tend to think of spirituality as something that's up to us, something that we work on, but we don't realize the extent to which the culture we live in makes it so profoundly difficult for us to be spiritual and to be happy people. And as I've reflected on this, and I've written a book about it on radical gratitude, as I've reflected on this, I've come to see that in this culture of materialism or consumerism, it works through advertising. And the function of advertising is to make us want more, to want a bigger car, a better car, a faster car, or even a smarter car. So advertising sets up within us a craving for more. And to do that, it has to make us dissatisfied with what we have. So if I have a small car, I have to be dissatisfied with it to get a big car. Or if I'm really cool, I have to want a smart car instead of a big car. But it's this dynamic of craving and dissatisfaction, which makes us want to go shopping, which makes the whole economic system work. That craving is what is so soul-destroying. And I think very often we think of our spirituality or lack of it as kind of a personal issue or problem or quest or something. And we hardly ever realize that the culture we live in is making it all the time difficult for us to live spiritually for this reason, that if consumerism sets up within us the kind of craving that makes us dissatisfied with everything that we have, so we will want more or something different. The terrible thing is that that dissatisfaction with clothes, with jobs, with relationships, the dissatisfaction can spread, and it becomes not just about things, but about the world that we live in. Other people, they're not good enough. And probably the worst of all is when the dissatisfaction with things implodes and inverts within us and becomes a dissatisfaction with our very selves. So I don't have enough becomes I am not enough, or becomes I am not good enough. We're dissatisfied with who we are. And I think this, to me, is about the only way of understanding what seems so incomprehensible to most refugees. Why is it that in the richest, wealthiest, most stable culture on earth, so many people seem dissatisfied and unhappy? With themselves, most of all. And as I have talked with my students who'd be your age, people I work with, friends, I see so many people who by materialistic standards should be happy, but they're not. And it's this profound sense that they're not good enough, that they don't have enough, that they, in some profound way, they aren't enough. And so they live with feelings of vague guilt and powerlessness. And again, so difficult to understand from outside. Why is it that in the richest, most powerful culture on earth, so many people feel vaguely guilty, like I'm not good enough? I don't mean specifically guilty. Specific, in my view, specific guilt is a good thing. It means saying, I did this, I messed up, I'm sorry, and you move on. There's something about that that's so healthy. It means your life is consequential. But when you just feel vaguely guilty about everything, that somehow you're not good enough, you turn on the TV, you look at the world, you say, I'm somehow responsible, but we don't know how. So this, to me, in this culture, our deepest bondage is this profound sense of dissatisfaction with our lives. Not just with this or that thing, but with who we are. And it keeps us about a centimeter away from happiness. I've said sometimes that in this culture we don't live behind an iron curtain, we live behind a plastic curtain. It's just, we're just this far away from happiness. So I feel blessed to have been able to see my own culture through new eyes and through a very, very important perspective. Because I think very often we treat our faith, our hopes, our spirituality, our sense of identity of who we are, we treat these as personal issues and problems. And they may be that. But I would just encourage you tonight to reflect on the ways in which all of those experiences of unhappiness and dissatisfaction, in fact, are part of the cultural air that we breathe. And I think this is most difficult for us, that culture, our own culture, is invisible. We, like the fish in water, we don't know the air that we breathe. And to become conscious of how we as human beings, as spiritual beings, are so affected and afflicted by this culturally induced dissatisfaction, I think is absolutely crucial. That we see the effect on us. I think the statistics are, the most recent statistics are that the average North American who watches TV, who listens to the radio, reads a newspaper, surfs the internet, by the end of his or her life will have assimilated 4 solid years of advertising alone. Not programming, just advertising. So that means some people study to be priests for 3 years. They have to begin with the humble assumption that they are at least as shaped by 4 years of advertising as they are by the gospel. Or any of us who want to be Christians, we have to say, look what we're up against. And it's not like people are beating down the doors or shooting us for being Christians. It's this air that afflicts us with profound unhappiness and dissatisfaction. So I think the question then becomes, and how will we be set free? And I think I'll just make 2 quick suggestions, and we can spend the rest of the evening talking about all of this. But I would say that freedom, your inner freedom and your happiness depends on finding your way to a point of radical gratitude. So in a culture that's fueled by dissatisfaction and by craving, to be able to say, for starters, I have enough. I have enough. I really don't need a faster computer. It's enough. Just to be able to say that. I don't need to take that trip. It's enough. I don't need a faster bike. It's enough. However that works in your life, and will all be different, that simple movement towards satisfaction. So instead of feeling it's not good enough, I never have enough, I never have enough, to say it is enough is at least a little step towards beginning to say about our lives, I'm enough. I'm good enough. Now, most of us spend a lot of our lives with an accounting view of life. We add up the pluses, we add up the minuses, and somehow we never feel quite good enough. But to be able to say really simply, I don't have a perfect life, but it's good enough. It's good enough. That's the beginning of freedom. That's the beginning. That's when you can really begin to live. You're not living for something else, for something different. You're able to say, just as I am is good enough, is enough. And I see this all the time in the work for justice that we do. I mean, we can be so paralyzed by these feelings that we should be changing the world and doing this and doing more and doing better. And we get down on ourselves, we get down on others, instead of saying, look, we can do this. Not everything, but something. And that's good. And we don't have to be the big superstars. We can do good, just as we are. And I think that some of that comes from a fundamental act of faith in a realization about the miracle of our own lives. That you probably can think back, and I can think back to incidents in my own life where I would say, I could just as easily not have been born. My mom might never have met my dad. They might never have got married. Just like that. They could have missed the train. And when you get a sense of just with a hair's breadth how easy it would have been that somebody else might have been born, but not you. And at some point, each one of you, me, we have to come to the point of saying, this is the life that's been given to me. This life. And it's not perfect. We can spend a lot of time on what's wrong with our life, and there may be definite things, what's not perfect, and there may be definite things. But even with all of that to say, it's still amazing. I'm here. As I am, I can do good. And I will do good. That's the beginning, that kind of gratitude, of deep satisfaction. It doesn't take away from the fact that there are problems in the world, in our lives, and in our families. But to say, with all of that, I've still been given this one great chance at life. This is my gift. That's the beginning of gratitude. I have enough, I am enough, I'm good enough. Now, to live with that and to grow in it, I think takes practice. And just tonight, I'll just make two simple suggestions. I think everything depends on how we wake up in the morning. I think that some people, the alarm goes off, you just roll over, or the alarm goes up, you get up, coffee, you go to class, you run, and you just run through the whole day. And in the process, you take everything for granted. You take it for granted that you wake up. You could have died, but you didn't. You take it for granted you wake up. You take it for granted you have a place to go, work to do, and you just... And the end of the day comes and it's just washed over. But to begin the day consciously, whatever this means for you, whatever way you pray, but to say, I awake. I have been given this day. I have been given this life. That's important, to consciously begin each day with a radical gratitude for what has been given. The second thing I would say is that given the fact that our culture is like the air that we breathe, this makes it so pervasive, so powerful. We really cannot live in a better, newer, fresher way on our own. It's just too powerful. And so we really need to be with other like-spirited people. People seeking to live by faith. People seeking hope. People who are fundamentally grateful, which doesn't mean we don't have bad moments, but to be fundamentally grateful, to be Eucharistic at the deepest level of our being. We need to gather with other like-spirited people. We cannot do it on our own. And that's why I think that something like Theology on Tap is, this is great. You're with like-spirited people. And we can help each other to be Eucharistic in that radical sense of giving thanks constantly.